Thank you both for being here. You are such inspirations in the field and in the world. Thank you for all your incredible work. And we'll start with the foundational question from each of you is, how do each of you define trauma now at this point in your career and in your research?
You want to start, Bess?
Well, trauma is a trauma. In Greek, it means wound. And it is a horrendous experience. Horrendous experience, that's really important. That overwhelms your capacity to cope, basically. It's not like nasty stuff, unpleasant difficulties, the weather being bad, you're having to dig your car out of the snow. It's about really overwhelmingly horrible things.
Yeah, I'm thinking one of the best definitions that I've heard, succinct definition, is the one from Freud in the late 1900s. And he said that trauma is a breach in the protective barrier against stimulation leading to feelings of overwhelming helplessness. I think that's really the key. The only thing that I would add is it's a breach in the protective barrier against overstimulation, leading to feelings of overwhelming helplessness. So I think he really nailed it. Unfortunately, he went in a very different direction after that. But to me, that really says it. And when I started working with people in the 60s, one of the things that came up, what times when these people felt overwhelmed, particularly that their autonomic nervous system couldn't adapt, so they didn't have bounce back resilience. And so a lot of my work with them was about bringing together a more resilient nervous system and a more resilient organism. So, okay.
Yeah, like me supplement what you're saying. Trauma is not an event that happened somewhere in the past. That event is over and it's gone. Trauma is the imprint that your reaction to that event leaves in you. And much of my work and my colleague who's staying with me right now, Marty Teicher and Ruth Lanius, has been it's about how trauma changes your brain, changes how you experience the present. And trauma changes how you experience all sorts of things and how you organize your reaction to what for other people is neutral stimuli, and you react to things as if the past is back.
Yeah, and I would also say one more thing. Of course, trauma is something that goes on in the brain, in the mind. But the way I came to trauma in the 60s was that when something happens, you just look outside your door or something, and you see somebody has been fallen off a bicycle. And so you get oh, and then you look more carefully and they're really seriously injured. And you get yuck, and that's the brain talking to the body, talking to the autonomic nervous system, and talking to our basic instinctual functions. And but it's something that goes in the body, because when you saw that accident, your guts twisted. Yuck. Your breath got stuck. You feel stuck. So again, what can we do with that? How can we help people move through that? And one of the things that I think is really important, and also involved with you and our dear friend Stephen Porges, Beth, is that this two-way communication channel is the vagus. One of them, the main one, is the vagus nerve. But what was not so readily known is that the vagus nerve is 80% afferent, is 80% sensory. So it's getting information from our organs and sending it back up to the brain. And this becomes what I call a positive feedback loop with negative consequences. And until we're able to change that relationship with mind and body, as you were saying, Bessel, we don't have access to our here and now experience of life. Yeah.
I'm wondering if we could each take some time, or each of you could take some time you started it, Peter, but we can move a little further into it, is share how you each came to understand and recognize the importance of how the body shows up in trauma healing, or in other words, how the body keeps the score.
Right, right. And that's the wonderful title of Bessel's book. But the way I came to it is I was very curious. I was developing a series of mind-body exercises. I talk a little bit in my autobiography. And when I found that I could relax in a specific way, a significant or a special sequence of what's the word I want? Of relaxing muscles in the jaw, the neck, the throat, the diaphragm, that their blood pressure would, these are again working with a group of men who had high blood pressure, that not all the time, but often the blood pressure would drop 5, 10, 15, even 20 degrees. And so I was realizing that something goes on with them. And as I explored that further, it was clear that many of these people had not only experienced trauma, but they had also experienced high levels of stress throughout periods of their childhood and even to some degree of their adulthood. So that kind of gave me the idea of a place to where to start, a placeholder. And I went from there. And so that was really what took me in this direction, because when I worked with these people, a lot of images would come up from the past with very difficult emotions. So as I was able to guide them, then they were able to restore balance. And then that's when I realized, no, this is not just about relaxing certain muscles. It's something much more deeper than that. And that was how I came to my work, my interest.
Yeah, this is really what brought Peter and me together. It seems so obvious that you see it right in front of your face. It's like you're talking about something is happening, and suddenly somebody becomes agitated, and their voice changes, and their breathing goes fast, and it doesn't take a lot of observational power to see what Abraham Gardner, who was really the first person who described this issue back after the First World War, said it's a physioneurosis. It's your physiology belives the trauma. And that's what you see right in front of you, is that the body keeps score. And then people say, oh, but the body doesn't remember. I never said the body remembers. That you experience trauma through heartbreaking and gut-wrenching sensations in your body, which are generated by the alarm system in your brain that sends these messages to your body that you're in danger. And so the challenge with trauma is not so much, although it's also useful to find words for what happens to you, but the big challenge is to change your physiology so that stuff that objectively is not particularly dangerous to you, it no longer becomes a threat, and your body no longer responds to minor stimuli as if you're about to die.
Yep. I was just thinking back about the connecting link between body and mind, and the vagus nerve. Darwin, I think you know this also, Bessel, that Darwin talked about this as the pneumogastric nerve.
That's right.
It goes from the gut, from the lungs and the gut, and of course from the viscera. And he realized that nerve, which is really totally amazing, that this nerve was responsible for gut wrench and heartbreak.
Exactly.
I mean, if you
It's
want to talk
way
about
before
definition,
any of us knew very much about the brain. Darwin nailed it. Yep.
Yeah, he nailed it. And of course, he's our hero.
Yeah.
Or one of our heroes.
Yeah, and interesting. Darwin had his own issues.
Oh, yes. Vegetonia.
Interesting. His mother died when he was 8 years old, and he repressed the memory. He had no response, but he and his wife had quite a few children. And whenever his wife would give birth to another child, Darwin would become sick for several months. clearly a post-traumatic reaction to the loss of his own mom.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, typical one. And he suffered from a lot of what I talk about as syndromes.
Yeah.
You know, a lot of autonomic syndromes, combinations of high arousal, fight or flight, and then also a shutdown. So he had many, many physical symptoms.
Which shows again that you can be very traumatized and be brilliant at the same time.
Yes, yes.
It's very
That's
important.
a really important one. It's a really
Yeah.
important because, you know, it's sort of like people who have had this early trauma. Like a friend of mine, really wonderful woman named Edith Eger. She just last year, I think it was, published a book called The Choice. She was a Holocaust survivor.
Yeah.
And this woman is at a high level of functioning. But when we visit her, we try to find some little ways to work with some of what she experienced. But she, you know, she's famous, she's compassionate, she's an incredible therapist. But on the other hand, some people who have a similar background never can function, and they get sick and may die.
You know, but what we mentioned yesterday actually is that people are not a unitary phenomenon. We all have parts. So that person may be compassionate, warm, and sweet most of the time, but if she gets triggered, she may throw a temper tantrum.
Yeah,
Out of nowhere. So what trauma really does to you is it activates certain systems while other systems emerge to compensate for it. And so people always live in quite a varied internal reality from time to time, depending on the circumstances. And so our work is to, and Peter has been a major teacher for me in that regard, is to activate the memories or the experience of one body while keeping people safe. And that is, and I just have always loved working with you, Peter, in that regard, because I also always love it when I see you do it. It's just beautiful how you very gently move people to the experience of danger and just very gently help them to experience it and to allow them to put an end to the experience or to come to some sort of completion.
Completion, I think, is really the operative here. Completion and relative safety. Finding some place where the person feels safe enough to begin to touch into these sensorial experiences.
And then our job as therapists is to be that container of safety. That is not to be brilliant or to say profound things, but to really just be a presence that makes it safe for people to go into very painful and dangerous situations.
Yeah. You know, sometimes I'm sure they do with you. People send the books they would like an endorsement. So sometimes I'll look and I thumb through the book and I notice that it's a really, really wonderful quote. And that I was going to ask them if I could use it. But then when I looked a little bit more closely, it was from one of my books, In an Unspoken Voice.
That happens sometimes.
Yeah, I know, that's kind of weird. And the quote is something like, trauma is not so much or not just what happened to us, but rather what we hold inside in the absence of a present, empathetic other. And I think that's another way of what you were just saying, Bessel, that we really have to be balanced in ourselves, grounded in ourselves, in the here and now with ourselves, so that we can provide that container for our clients, patients. Excuse me.
But of course, once you go into your trauma, you may lose touch with the empathetic other. Because your perception becomes the whole world's dangerous. People may become really frightened of you, even though you may have started off with the very best of intentions. When people get triggered, their whole world gets contaminated or gets determined by the trauma. And so our job is to really keep people mindful enough and calm enough and connected enough so they can very gently and gingerly go into these very painful
Yeah.
memories and experiences of the past. Yeah,
But in one small amount at a time. I
very
don't
small.
really agree with the exposure therapy kinds of things
Oh
where
yeah,
you have to relive
you
it.
and I are the same word. Like that is really your term, Peter. That now we all use that
Titration.
issue of pendulation,
Oh,
uh,
yes.
and oftentimes people come in and finally they have a chance to talk, and they start vomiting out their trauma, and that doesn't really do you any good. It has to be integrated. It has to become part of you, and you have to do it very gently and very gingerly. Huh? Yeah.
And that's vitally important, and it's precious
Yeah.
when we can offer that.
Was that something you came to realize right away, or was that over time, that process of titrating into the traumatic experience?
There's days that in one session you can do amazing things, and in one session people can come to a completion, and for other people it may take years before you can get there.
Yes,
Yeah.
absolutely.
Yeah.
And I think that's another one we have to have some humility about, is yes, sometimes you see really miraculous changes.
Yeah.
But sometimes where people have been severely abused, neglected in their early childhood, that takes more work. And it also takes, along with working with the trauma, with also working with the relationship.
Right.
And
But I learned actually from Onno and Pierre Genet actually is that people become afraid of feelings themselves.
yeah,
And people don't want to feel because any sort of feeling is associated with danger. And so it becomes a very careful process to help people to begin to feel themselves and to begin, as many people, when you're traumatized, you say, how about if you take a deep breath? And say, I don't want to take a deep breath. That any sort of stirring up of your internal world is dangerous. They will be happy to tell you trauma stories, but actually to go inside and meeting yourself may be very terrifying. Yeah.
and like you said, it's about pendulation, because when people, let me grab this, first experience their sensations, there's a contraction, and people are terrified, as you just said, with that contraction. So they avoid in any way they can. So maybe their body first responded against threat and against bracing, but now the person is bracing against the very feelings that can help them to heal. So instead of dissociating or leaving this, to just notice when they can be guided into a contraction, and then help them open to an expansion, and then a contraction, and then an expansion. That's my word I coined, was pendulation, because it's and what also is maybe not so well understood is that just going into expansion doesn't do the trick. You have to be able to hold together those experiences of contraction and expansion. If it's just expansion, you have what they call in the meditation circles, I know because I've taught there, is that it's a bliss bypass. You experience bliss, but that's all you want to acknowledge. That's all you want to be with, but it doesn't work that way.
So yesterday, our paper that we did a very large research project in psychedelics, and we showed that psychedelics are very powerful in helping people to go into the capacity to feel these things much more deeply. And we had half the people got psychotherapy only, the other half got MDMA added to it. And it was really stunning how much the MDMA helped people to go into the spaces that they ordinarily wouldn't go to. It was just published yesterday in PLOS ONE. And it really was a stunning thing because we had never seen anything besides us who could help people with it. And it turns out psychedelic agents can really be very powerful in promoting that in people. Yeah.
Yeah, that's such an important topic, and one section in my autobiography book is really to look at both the promises and potential pitfalls of psychedelics, how incredibly powerful they can be, but how people need to be prepared and followed up
Yeah,
and so
yeah,
forth. And I
yeah.
think that's the key. And the research that you and what's the name of that organization?
Maps.
You-
Yeah,
yeah, are doing this research, and I think it will be said to be a revolutionary change.
yeah. And
It's
you know, it's
not,
interesting that is sort of the hot topic these days. But what is missing in that research is exactly your work. Huh? That when people
yes,
go into their trauma on psychedelics, they have very powerful somatic experiences. And most people who do this work are not trained by you or other people who are very good in dealing with the body, and they don't know how to deal with the somatic responses. So it's very important
exactly.
to bring these two worlds together, actually.
That's
Yeah.
right. And I like the way your hands come together like this, Bessel.
Right.
It's like bringing the two together. I think that's where it's at, man.
He'll see anything, you know. He'll just see it. Like you twitch your ears. I notice how your ears like
Oh,
observing,
well,
observing,
for me, that
observing.
would take me back to when I was a young child, and my ears are the same size as they are right now. So people made fun of me and called me Dumbo. So when we were at the Evolution of Psychotherapy conference, I realized I didn't bring my nightshirt. So we went to one of the Disney stores, and there was a Dumbo T-shirt. So immediately Laura bought the T-shirt for me so I could wear it and renegotiate my ear trauma.
Yeah. Humor
And
is very important. Huh?
it is,
I
it
find
is.
that people
Like,
who have some people you work with have been horrendously traumatized, but preserve their sense of irony and humor, and that makes it so much easier to work with people,
yeah.
um, like who can also have a little bit of a capacity to laugh at themselves. Yeah, yeah.
But again, we have to really make sure they don't experience us as us
That's right.
doing that.
That's right.
And it really has to be coming from there. And usually it comes from these little moments of joy
Yeah,
that may come up, you know. And
yeah.
I think just building on those certainly is helping with their healing.
Are those tools that build the resilience to go into the
Well,
healing?
humor is not a tool. Humor is something that emerges. You cannot
Yeah.
teach people humor. It's humor comes out of like Peter and I have a very long-term, quite intimate relationship, and we can be funny with each other because we feel safe together. And that can only happen when people feel really relaxed and can look at the internal contradictions and on the one hand this and the other hand that, but you cannot say, let me teach you having a sense of humor. Like that doesn't work that way. Like, but
Right. I think you made the point.
yeah.
Yeah.
Uh, Going with that, what are some of the tools or the practices that you have found helpful to build that resilience to move
Yeah.
into the healing
Well,
process?
you know, when people are able to guide
Mhm.
to their positive internal experience,
Mhm.
which is really about autonomic resilience, I think that's the key as much as anything else in building resilience. Also, you know, as therapists, we're also counselors, and we often find out something that really has affected them in a positive, resilient way. One of the things, if you're working with people with trauma, depression, anxiety, they really don't see anything except that. And so if you ask them, how was your day? Basically, they say, crappy. And well, uh, then I think, okay, well, is that the entire experience of the person? So I developed exercise. I call it what do I call it? Anyhow, I'll say what the practice is, and then if I can remember the name, I'll give you the name. Oh, the conflict-free experience, so that you could go beyond the conflicts. So the idea is to think of a time, so I'm talking to a client, to think of a time in the last day, the last 24 hours, when you felt even the smallest amount less anxiety, depression, fear, or you felt a little bit more like yourself, the self you would want to be. And the person will say, well, no, there wasn't any time. But yes, but I'm asking the question during that time, there was, of course, one time at least where it wasn't just as horrible. Oh yeah, I can remember a friend called me. A friend I hadn't heard from in a long time, and it was really a nice contact. So that's that's a building resilience. Then the next step, I say, okay, well, how about in the next the last 2 or 3 days? Another time, a different time, again, when you felt a little bit less anxious, a little bit less despairing, blah, 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 blah. And then the person might say something, oh, yeah. I have a pet dog, and we went out for a walk together, and she was just jumping around and just clearly enjoyed. Okay, as you can see that image, let's just have you shift back and forth between that image and whatever you're experiencing in your body. And again, that's about also another aspect of building resilience. I think any therapy that doesn't build resistance is not going to be an effective therapy.
And that's not only true for the people we work with who are traumatized, but therapists want to go after the trauma story. What's your trauma story? But it strikes me as almost nobody who I supervise for the first time knows anything about what gives that person a sense of pleasure. No history of pleasure, no history of safe people, no history of accomplishments. And that is, again, part of the pendulation piece, is to get also in touch with what gives you joy, what gives you pleasure, what has been around. So then you can do the pendulation between the pain and the pleasure. But it's very important to do a pleasure history and a joy history and a connection history.
We call it a trauma resource inventory.
Yes. Yeah. But even that already has the word trauma in it. But maybe you should talk about life resource inventory.
Well, that's sort of the idea.
I don't feel like that's often modeled. So maybe we can even do that now with you both sharing, like, what brings you joy and what brings you pleasure.
It's different for different people. For me, music is terribly important. I'm riding my bikes to the hills here and walking through nature, gardening, talking with my friends. The usual stuff.
Just a little while ago, in September, I guess, you and I and Steve Porges were presenting together in Oxford at this
in the Sheldonian Theatre in Oxford, which is not sort of a minor little place.
Okay, and when I think about that, I think about the three of us sitting there together in the stage, and I think that really that joy that brought.
Oh, absolutely.
And how much we are gifted by giving people or give these gifts. And also, I think what affects me also is there's an expression called tekum alom. It's a Jewish expression. And it means to leave the world in a better place than you found it. And I think that also, when I think about that, relate to that brings me a great deal of satisfaction, that I know that I have done the best, that I have followed my truth, sometimes difficult, but that's for me very
I can see so many experiences you and I had when we used to teach together, of just a real deep sense of joy when we had moved the person from one place to the other. And everybody feels great, like they feel great and we feel great about what we have been able to do. Therapy can be a very joyful experience if you become a good therapist.
Thank you for going into that pleasure and that joy. As you share it, I can feel the resonance of it, the contagiousness of it, and I can really hear it and feel in my own body the power of that as you speak of it in terms of resilience.
Well, not only resilience, I think the word pleasure is not being used enough in our field. Life is really about finding what gives you pleasure, gives you joy. And that's an important pursuit for us.
Mhm.
Yes, in the Constitution in America, the pursuit of
Right.
it's a fundamental right.
It's
I'm
not just about anybody can have guns.
But yeah, but the guns come in. Oh, you need to keep your slaves under control. I forgot. Yeah.
I'm hoping you both could share some of stories or highlights in the many years you've been working with people of stories of healing that have impacted you, or that still feel so present and resonant in your body even now.
Yesterday, a person who
Okay.
saw
Yeah,
me
yeah.
40 years ago, who we did 4 sessions of neurofeedback with, and who got a real deep sense of her preciousness. I mean, it happens all the time. It happens in almost every psychedelic session we do. The somatic experiencing sessions that we have and that Peter is such a master at. We just taught a class, a workshop at Kupalu for 150 people. And when people come into their own, calm themselves down and discover each other, the world is filled with wonderful things, actually. Yeah.
I'm often asked the question, well, what do you do if the person doesn't have a sense of their body?
Yeah.
And actually, Bessel, there was a young man in one
Yeah.
of our workshops,
Yeah.
our 2-day workshops. And so he followed me afterwards and wanted to do some therapy, but he lived up in the Bay Area. He works in high tech,
Right.
and he clearly on the spectrum. And so he would come to work with me. I think it was probably 3 days every year. And when we first started working, he typed out questions he had for me on his computer. He wasn't looking at me, he was looking at his computer over to the side. And so I would get on my computer and respond to him, even though he was standing there, sitting right there. So the second year was the same kind of thing. And so, but the third year, he opened the computer and closed the computer and looked at me.
Yep.
So again, this was someone who didn't have a sense of the body and needed to be met at their
Yep.
level. So I just want to show you, every year I get postcard from him, and here is probably.
That's a lovely postcard.
Isn't that wonderful?
Picture
Isn't that
speaks
wonderful?
1,000 words.
It does, and I have so much joy when I
Yeah.
see that, and appreciation for him. And he always says something like, "Dear Peter, hope you are well." But
Yeah.
again, if we find a way to meet people where they are and not where we want them to be, that is
Yeah.
also important.
But what you're saying is such a critical thing, that if you cannot feel your body, you cannot feel yourself, and you cannot feel pleasure. So a normative response to trauma, because it's lived out, as Darwin already said, in Heartbreak and Gut Wrench, is to learn to shut off your emotions and your sensations. Very useful thing to do when you're overwhelmed by your feelings. But if that becomes your habitual way of being in the world, it pays off because you stop feeling pain, but you don't feel pleasure either, because pleasure is also a bodily sensation, and you cannot select one over the other.
Yeah.
In order to feel your pleasure,
You can't
also
avoid-
feel your
right.
pain.
Yeah.
And so
Yeah,
that opening up of the bodily sensations to yourself is very much at the core of trauma treatment.
Yeah.
And if I have to give references to that, I would say more than anybody else, Peter Levine taught me that. Although some other people may say, but I taught you that too.
Yeah, there's a kind of I don't know if it's Tibetan, but it's some tool that are used in different techniques, I don't say techniques, approaches, and that we can't avoid pain. If we try to avoid pain, that's not going to work, but we can't also grasp onto pleasure. And to really, that's the midway, according to the Buddha.
Yeah.
You don't grab onto pleasure, you don't try to push away pain.
See, and the critical issue here is the issue of time. And so I like to show a videotape of a mom who doesn't pay attention to her kid, and then the kid gets very distressed. You've seen that movie. And
Yeah.
then the mom comes back and takes care of the distressed kid. And it shows how this child gets an internal frame of the world of sometimes I can really feel crappy, but my mom will come and help me out. And many people who are traumatized don't have an internal sense of this can be over at some point. And there are certain areas of the brain that have to do with timing that actually don't work anymore. And so when you are feeling terrible, it feels like this will last forever, as opposed to sometimes things are unpleasant, sometimes things are painful, but time will flow us through things. And so a very important part of healing from trauma is to get that sense of time in your mind of now I feel really crappy and then I feel better. And to get a sense of also things you can do, that if you get really upset, if I do my yoga poses, or I make contact with a person, or I go for a bicycle ride, I can help my body to calm themselves down. So trauma is really about a sense of timelessness, that this will last forever, which all of us have had that experience.
And with the,
But also you do that very beautifully in your work that you demonstrate also.
yeah, I think in a way, this is what you were talking about, the people that don't get better after 1 or 2 sessions,
That's right.
that they have to keep having that experience with us over and over until it really then becomes embodied,
Right.
becomes linked in the body. Yeah.
And so, and then it becomes really the cultivation of getting a sense of time, of oh, now I feel bad and now I don't feel bad, and now I feel joyful, and then pain will come and I'll deal with the pain when it comes. And I think that's really the big maturing issue that, again, in our psychedelic therapy was a very powerful thing that came online in people. Yeah.
Is it the pendulative process that can help reinstate time? Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, the pendulation is really that people become aware of, oh, now I feel safe and now I feel pain. Now I remember something awful and then I remember something good. And that have that mental flexibility that you don't get trapped in one state of mind, but you know that you are a complex composite person who can feel depths of despair and heights of joy all at the same person. And that's all part of me. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Something I appreciate so much of both of your work is that reinstating of time, the reinstating of space, the reinstating of feelings in the body, this reinstating of these primal elements of what it is to be alive.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And these are really primal elements that are not cognitive elements. You cannot say to people, you should experience a sense of time. Our job is to help people to experience that on a very deep level and to discover that themselves. We cannot discover that for people.
Yeah. So because we have another 10, 15 minutes, I'd love to spend some time looking back at the history of your work, both of you, and just ask you, what has been your mission or your drive? What are you most proud of as you're looking back of decades of incredible work?
Well, it's always a progression. For me, a very important moment came, and anybody who's heard me talk, hears me talk about it, is that at some point somebody showed me a videotape of a woman who was very distressed and very pained, who did EMDR. And after 2 sessions, she said, it is over.
Mm.
The trauma is no longer there. And that little videotape inspired me to go like, people have the birthright to be able to say, it is over. And so my quest has been very much like some method work for some people, other method work for some other people, but my job is to find what will help this person to say it is over.
Over. It's over.
And that's really the
And,
quest for me is, and that I've explored many different methods. That's I'm not a guru. I don't propose any particular method. Say some people can say it's all over after they do somatic experiencing. Other people say it's all over after EMDR. Other people get together through psychedelics. And so our job is really to find out what is it that you need or what you should explore for you to be able to say it is over.
That's good advice. Good advice. And it's important that the therapist doesn't say, well, this happened a long time ago. It isn't,
Yeah, but
it's over.
right,
I
right.
I mean, yeah, but we just put in that caveat.
Yeah. And then it actually came up yesterday. Then people say, "Oh, this person is treatment resistant." But you should say, "Oh, I don't know enough to help this person with the methods that I've learned."
Yeah,
So
absolutely.
the tradition in medicine and psychology is to blame the patient if you fail with them, instead of saying, "Oh, my method didn't work. What do I need to learn to help this particular person to get better?"
Yeah, yeah. Where's our shortcomings?
Yeah, and I love to show people pictures of the Webb telescope and what the universe looked like 30 years ago. And 30 years ago, we could see just a little bit of the universe. As technology evolves, we can see
We'll
much
call
more.
that in a bit.
And I think that is what happens in psychology. We are in a process of learning stuff. 40 years ago, nobody knew anything about the treatment of trauma. And now we have discovered some things that are often helpful. And I hope that in the next 50 years, the field will be as fertile as it has been for the past 40 years. And that people 50 years from now will laugh at us about how ignorant we were. And I hope that they will laugh at us and say they were living in the dark ages,
I love that. Peter, what about for you? What's been sort of the driving force, your mission, and what you're most
Well,
proud of?
gosh. Okay, so over the past 50 years, I've developed this approach called somatic experiencing, the living body, and and I've taught in many places, as we did at Esalen, but all around the world. And I really at one time realized, my gosh, the archetype of Chiron, the wounded healer, and that was really what was also driving me.
Mhm.
So I decided to make an exploration, an excavation of my life, kind of reflecting back and trying to find the pieces that connect together and that still need to connect together. So I did that, and it was meant only to be for my own work, my own healing work. But then this person I know, the publisher, somehow he had heard about that, and he said, "Well, why don't you make it as a book and publish it as a book?" And I said, "No, it's just for me. It's only for me." And then I had the following dream. And in the dream, I'm standing facing a field, and in my hand are pages, typewritten pages. And it's like in the dream, I'm looking from left to right to left, just obviously I'm not knowing what to do. And then behind me, this wind comes and takes all of these pages and fills them and sends them to the meadow and land where they may. And that's when I realized that I would be willing to try to write something that could help people heal, and also could kind of be the backstory of how I developed my work. And I received wonderful support from so many people. And so anyhow, the book is now at the publisher. It's called An Autobiography of Trauma, A Healing Journey. It's available on Amazon. And then I realized, okay, now I can let go. I mean, I was feeling terror when I realized that this could be a book. And I've gone back and forth between terror and leaving that leaving this legacy and for people to build upon. I think I really appreciated what you said about they will look back and just say, good Lord, these people were clueless, or at least in some way. I mean, imagine they'll give us some kind of credit. So anyhow, writing that book and putting it out, and then actually the first time I actually talked to an audience and mentioning it was at the Evolution Conference. And I stood up and, there's some thousands of people, and I felt terror. I felt sheer terror. And one thing I've learned is not to try to deny it, but just to kind of enlist the people. And I said, look, I'm really scared about this. And what's made it possible is that the endorsements that several of the people I know and several friends have done. And I felt their support. I felt their holding of me in this endeavor and in writing the autobiography. So, and even when I talk about it now, I get a little bit of a twist, but it moves through. It moves through. And I think that I'm going to probably do a couple of other books, one on spirituality and trauma, and then another one with a very close friend on healthy sexuality for adolescents, which of course is just a complete disaster. So I think writing books, walking on the beach, going to real places where I really feel like I can swim and be and move and dance, to really shift my life now and to follow my heart, to take me and lead me in the next steps, wherever they are, because I don't really know exactly where they're going to be. Okay.
So I think it's really important what Peter's saying about the wounded healer, and that's something that may be not easy when you're young and insecure to really see yourself as the laboratory animal, that we all have our pain and our hurt. And as my friend Beatrice Bibi, the attachment researcher, says, all research is research. And we become therapists in order to heal ourselves or heal our mother or something. This is never neutral. You devote your life to this because there's something inside of you that you want to heal. And getting in touch with your own pain, your own hurt, is enormously important to become a good therapist and to really feel what you have put up with and what you have dealt with. And if you really get in touch with that, you become much more respectful for other people and other people's solutions. And when you hear how affected you have been by the own adversities you have experienced, you go like, and other people, you hear other people's stories like, that was much worse than what happened to me, and I have no idea how I would have dealt with what you have gone through. And you start with a position of great empathy and great respect. People actually have survived what they have survived. It's very important. And Peter,
right on.
Peter,
Right on.
yeah.
I'm wondering if we can land with just sharing something you're excited about for the future. Peter, you started some, and I just want to offer a little more space of like, if there's what's next for you or something you're excited for future projects or research that people can be excited about.
I'm not the researcher.
Or projects.
Like, so we finally published our self-experience in MDMA paper. I think psychedelics are very exciting. I'm very worried about it. I think it's last time it got screwed up, and I'm not sure that it won't get screwed up this time. But I think psychedelics hold enormous promise to really go very deep into the sort of stuff that Peter, more than anybody else, has been exploring, your relationship to your body. And I think there's some real promise that I would be excited about exploring or helping people explore, whether we can change very deep issues like autoimmune diseases, fibromyalgia, with learning how to work much deeper with body sensation and body awareness.
Absolutely.
And we're not there at this point. And I
Well,
think
we're
that,
getting there.
yeah.
I think we're getting it. Want to make sure we have time to mention the Boston Trauma Conference and also the one that Scott and Melissa are putting on.
Okay.
So maybe Bessel, you say a little bit about that yearly conference.
As I said, this year we have for the past 35 years, and Peter has been our guest several times. I run a conference in Boston where we learn from academic research, basic research in the brain, about what we really are learning in laboratories and connect it up with innovative treatments. We have singers, songwriters, movement people, yoga people, somatic experiencing people, but we also have stuff on very basic neuroscience, and it's the place where we try to put together the brain, the mind, the body, and spirituality. And so our foundation is called the Trauma Research Foundation, traumaresearch.com, and you can find a program there. Again, a lot of somatic experiencing, but it's really the integration about the huge amount of knowledge that we have these days about trauma that none of us can really contain. So it's a conference where people are really helped to see the whole complex spectrum of how a trauma does to the mind and the brain development, and the evolution of healing.